Hey, what's up everybody, Alex here, and today I'm going to talk a bit about mental health, and I've got the help of Lou, who has kindly had input into this video, which she'll share a bit about her story later, and a bit about what helps her get through mental health difficulties. But first I'll share a bit about my story and a bit about what I've been going through recently to sort of get it out there and hopefully help other people going through similar things. So my story starts about 10 years ago now, when I was about 13. I suffered a lot with anxiety, and I found going to school difficult, and just general regulating my mood and emotions quite difficult. A lot of people find it difficult when they go through puberty to deal with their emotions, but I found this particularly difficult. And then I started getting bullied at school. That started when I was about 14, and the bullying really affected my mental health. I wouldn't go to lessons. I would sit in the head of year's office instead of going to lessons, and I was really depressed and anxious and started self-harming. When my parents found out about that, they took me out of school, so I spent quite a while out of school, which was really difficult in itself, quite isolating, but it was what was needed at the time to get me out of a situation that was really, really negative for my mental health. Then I started a new school, which was great, met loads of new friends who I'm still friends with today, that have really helped me through some difficult times. But the whole transition to a new school was really tough for me, especially when I got mental health difficulties. I was under CAMS at this time, which were really unhelpful. The guy I saw at CAMS was a bit of an idiot and really didn't understand what I was saying when I was really depressed and felt suicidal and was self-harming, and he just didn't understand. I would see him every week, but we got nowhere, and then he discharged me and just basically said that there was nothing wrong with me, when clearly there was something wrong. And my mental health just got worse and worse and worse, and to the point where I failed my AS levels because I couldn't sit through an exam. I got special measures for exams, which meant that I sat in a separate room to everyone else, but even with that I didn't sit through a full exam. I left the room, had panic attacks, and I just couldn't cope with school. It was just too much for me. So I moved to a college, which was a lot better suited to me. I had a really good time at college. I started counselling. My counsellor was really, really good, and she helped me a lot to understand my emotions and how they go up and down all the time. And it was at this point where I got referred to adult mental health services via my GP, which was really good, because adult services have done a lot more for me than CAMS ever did, but they're still not great, and they're still really shocking, to be fair, but they've done a lot more for me than CAMS ever did, so there is that. So under adult mental health services, I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder and emotionally unstable personality disorder, which kind of go hand in hand, really. They've got very similar symptoms. It means I go through episodes of manic episodes and depressive episodes, and for me that can happen quite quickly with my EUPD. I can go through days where I have manic and depressive episodes in the same day, or the same hour even, or I can go through times where it's like I've got a week of a really manic episode, and then I'll get depressed and stay in a low episode. So yeah, I got diagnosed with them when I was 18, and because I was moving to uni, the service couldn't offer me much support. They said that there was no point offering me support because I was moving to a different city for university, and that the city I was going to for university would have to deal with my support, which meant when I moved to university I had to be re-referred to adult mental health services within the city that I lived in, which just delayed everything. And they initially rejected my referral, but then things got really bad during uni. I transitioned during this time, which made me happier in myself, but my mental health was still really bad. My uni placements were great and I love what I do, but all of the academic stuff just got on top of me, and it was just really difficult. Because I already struggle with my mental health, there was times where I felt really bad, but I felt bad about feeling bad, and that just spiraled and it just became too much. And especially during my management placement in my final year of university, things got really difficult. And coming out of university, finishing, you would think I would be really happy because I graduated and I would be over the moon, but I really was happy that I graduated, but my mental health just took a turn for the worst, and I don't really know why. I took an overdose and wanted to end my life and feel really suicidal, and this has been on and off for the last 6 months, which I've really struggled with my self-harm and suicidal ideation, and yeah, just feeling really depressed. And recently it's led me to the point where I've had a crisis team involved for the last 6 weeks, and were basically visiting me every day to make sure that I was alive. And I ended up in a crisis house, and a crisis house is where you go if they are worried that you're going to go into hospital with your mental health. So it's sort of like a halfway house between being in the community and being in hospital. And while I was there, I learnt a lot of skills to sort of calm and relax myself and deal with my mood swings, but it still wasn't the answer to everything. And so when I left the crisis house, I had a really difficult time because I didn't know how to cope outside of the house. The house was like a secure place for me to be, where I felt safe, and they were in control of my medications, and they'd do activities with me and just keep me generally safe. And when I left there, I was all by myself. But I have a really supportive housemate, which is really good because she took control of my medication after I left, which is really lovely, and she's super lovely and just amazing with everything to do with my mental health. But I was still feeling suicidal and really low, and they upped my antidepressants that I take. So I'm on 3 different medications for my mental health, well 4 different medications for my mental health at the minute, and that just keeps me going. And I used to feel ashamed of taking medication, and I would never take it, and I'd just leave it, and I'd get the prescription but not take the medication because I felt really ashamed, and I felt like it wasn't doing anything. It made me feel sick, and made me feel horrible. But I'm on medication now, which I take regularly, and it keeps me stable-ish. I still have episodes of manic and depressive episodes, but they've recently upped my antidepressants, and that has made a big difference. I feel that I'm more in control of my moods. I'm still really struggling with suicidal ideation and self-harm, but we're getting there slowly. And I should be starting something called structured clinical management soon, which is a sort of intense therapy which lasts for up to 2 years, and that's for people with emotionally unstable personality disorder, and hopefully that should help me become more stable and understand the condition a bit more, understand myself a bit more, and yeah. So that's a little bit about where I'm up to now, and how you can support me or people with mental health issues is just being able to listen to them, being able to share their voice if they can't share it themselves, because getting people's voices out there and all talking about mental health is really powerful and can really help other people who are struggling with their mental health know that they're not alone in this journey, and that other people feel the same, and people can really empathise with each other, and yeah, just learn to love each other a little bit more through sharing stories. Another way it could be practically supporting them, offering to take them to GP appointments or to hospital appointments, or just being able to offer them support like my housemate does with my medication. If I feel I can't look after my own medication, she'll look after it for me. We have a little lockbox that we've both got keys to that my medication goes in, and so if I don't feel safe, I just hand her my key and she just sorts it all out for me. And yeah, there's just so many practical things you can do to help, even just like sending them a message to say I'm thinking of you. The worst thing you can do is say I hope you get better soon, because in reality mental health is something that you struggle with for a long time, and it's something you struggle with in different ways for different periods of time, and you might have a really good mental health day, you might have a really bad mental health day, and saying get well soon to someone with mental health issues can be quite triggering, because you're like, I'm not going to get well soon, and it might just get them down. But sending positive messages like I'm thinking about you, or I'm here if you want to talk, here if you want to chat, yeah, and having good friendship groups and being supportive as a friendship group or as a friend is really important, because when you've got mental health difficulties you feel alone all the time and you feel like you're a burden on your friends, but knowing that you're not a burden and that they're really there to support you is a really important thing. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Lou now, who's going to talk to you a little bit about her story and how she can get through her mental health challenges. So yeah, over to Lou.
Hi everyone, my name is Lou. Alex asked me to share a little bit of my story with mental health, and actually when he suggested it I thought, well, this is going to be easy. I know exactly when and what I'm going to talk about, and I'll just talk and that will just happen. But actually the more I thought about it, the more I realised that there's kind of a lot more to it than we realise or that we recognise really. That actually our mental health is every decision that we make, every day that we face, whether that's whether we're facing rejection or change or struggle or difficulty or opposition, whether it's joy or opportunities or risks or anything really, celebrations. It's every up and down in our everyday life and faith. And I think when I thought about that I realised that actually I probably struggle quite a lot really in all of my life. It's definitely not been easy, but we often like just pigeonhole and box in the story around the toughest times, the rock bottom times, the really difficult times, but actually it's about all of it. So that was a really interesting thing as I reflected on this. But actually, so my first big struggle was when I was at uni. I was training to be a social worker, and 50% of your course is placement, and you have to do 3 block placements. One of those placements has to be a really difficult placement. They have to work out whether you can take it, whether you can hack it, and at 19 years old, spoiler alert, there was no way I could hack it. So I was put on a placement that was quite challenging. I felt quite out of my depth. It was a full-time placement, so it was basically like your job. And yeah, it was really tough. It was for 5 months, which doesn't sound very long, but when something's really difficult, that's a very long time. So I started on this placement. It was really challenging, but actually a big part of my anxiety with it was that it was quite unsafe. And because I really didn't want to have to start another placement in another difficult place, actually I really liked the people that I worked with and I felt really supported by them. And I didn't want to go into another place that actually could be even worse than this one. So I didn't tell anyone on my placement, I didn't tell uni at all, because I just wanted to survive, I just wanted to get through it. But that prolonged anxiety that I experienced from like the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed was just crippling. It just drained all of my positive hormones to the point where I was just running on empty. I just had nothing left. And I think I started in September in that sort of academic year, and by the time I was getting nearer to Christmas I was in a really bad place. A friend of mine recommended me go to the GP. The first time I went it wasn't hugely helpful, and I came away from that feeling a little bit disappointed because it had taken quite a lot to reach out for that help. But I went back to my friend and she said, actually, you need to book in with this particular doctor because they're really good. And she was fantastic, but she had a 3-week wait until I could see her, and that 3 weeks just felt like an eternity. It was really hard to get to that point and to get to meet her. But I did, and she was really helpful, and she diagnosed me with severe depression and anxiety, which didn't come as a surprise in many ways. But she was incredibly helpful. She started me on some medication, which I was on for about 6 to 9 months, so not a huge amount of time. But that first bit of time where you're waiting for the medication to kick in, it's maybe made you feel a little bit nauseous. You're still in the same circumstances. I was still going to work on my placement. I was still facing everything that I was still facing. But by that point I had to tell uni and I had to tell placement that this is the situation, this is what I'm struggling with, this is what's happened. And they were incredibly supportive. They'd not really realised a lot of what had happened. And so, yeah, they were really supportive and stuff. But even in their huge support of me, I still felt really ashamed that I'd not been able to cope, that I'd not been able to do the job that everybody else around me was able to do, that I'd not just been able to sort of power through and keep quiet about my struggles and what I found hard that other people didn't find hard. And I think in many ways that's what prolonged it, that's what made it get to the point that it did, was because I was embarrassed, because I was ashamed, because I felt I should have been stronger and more capable. I think that's probably true for a lot of people, that it's really difficult to admit that we can't cope with other things that other people maybe are coping with, or we don't want to admit that actually we are really struggling. It's really interesting that when I was a teenager I had leukemia, so as you can see I'd come out the other side, but it was a really, really difficult time, and a hard time for me mentally as well. But it was really interesting that actually coming out of the other side of that, I was really proud to tell my story of going through a really difficult time physically. And coming out the other side, I was really proud of that story and really happy to share that story. Actually, when I came out the other side of my mental health struggle, I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. I didn't want to talk to many people about it when I was going through it either, because again I just felt a bit embarrassed and a bit ashamed really. And it took me 5 years before I actually really told anyone who didn't know me really well about my story. And I think that's a really interesting reflection, that actually we expect our bodies physically to struggle at some point, whether that's from having a cough or a cold to having something really life-threatening that actually you might not get out the other side of. And yet mentally we're really hard on ourselves and we don't expect that, and we blame ourselves when that comes along in a way that we wouldn't see that physically. And that also those things that we come through physically, we might be really proud of to tell those stories, but coming through sometimes the mental things that we face don't always feel so proud of, because we have to tell those times when it was really tough. So yeah, about over 5 years after I'd experienced this, I was 19 or 20 when I'd gone through this, and by this point I was now a youth worker. I was working in a number of schools with a number of other youth workers, and we were doing a bit of a Q&A about life and faith. So I work for a church, I'm a Christian, and we were going into schools doing a bit of like Q&A on the big questions of life and faith. And one of the things that really came up was mental health. And so kind of I sheepishly offered to share a little bit of my story, and I didn't share as much as I've just shared now. It was very vague, it was very brief, and I sort of said, you know, it is okay not to be okay. It's okay if you're struggling, and do reach out and do talk to people, and you know, this is really important, and you're not, you know, you're not weak in this. And I sort of ended my little spiel with sort of just saying, like, if, you know, if you want to hear a little bit more, I'm happy to, you know, share or whatever. And I sort of sat down and got ready for someone else to get up and answer another question, and then like quite a few hands went up, and then somebody, you know, picked one of the people, and they were like, we really want to hear more about this, we want to know what happened, we want to know more about this, because people don't really talk about it, which I found really interesting, because, you know, it is something that we often feel maybe people do talk about a lot, but yeah, so they were sort of like, we really want to hear some more. And as that person said that, all these different hands sort of went down, and everybody sort of nodded, and it by far wasn't because my story was special, it wasn't because of the way that I told it, it wasn't because of me, it was because we just need to talk about this more, and people need to hear it, and to hear somebody else say that that was okay, and to maybe share some of the experiences that they've been through, or the people that they care about have been through, and to say that out loud is actually really, really important. And I think I walked away from that session thinking, and really sensing that actually it's really important that we don't just share our really strong and powerful and impressive sides, but actually that we share our vulnerabilities, that we're really honest, because that gives other people permission to be vulnerable, to be honest, to share their stories, and to not feel so alone. And I think that was the point where actually I started sharing my story a lot more. I started sharing it more publicly, but also sharing it more in my sort of one-on-ones with other people who were struggling, to sort of say, like, you know, this is something that so many people go through, and it's okay, and you know, it's okay to be honest, and that you're not on your own. Many people like that. Alex has hugely inspired me. I love being a youth worker, because actually young people are so brave in sharing their vulnerabilities, and their passions, and wearing their hearts on their sleeves, and not being afraid, as we often are as adults. And so I feel really inspired by people like Alex, who really bravely share their story and put it out there, and they don't really do it for themselves, they do it so that other people can feel seen and heard. Other people can feel less alone and less guilty for what they're battling, what they're struggling with, what they're fighting for. And so just, you know, huge shout out to Alex and all that he does on this channel, on his social media, because it's really brave. And I know that sometimes he gets some really negative stuff, and that must be really hard to keep sharing what is vulnerable about you, knowing that it does help some people, but that you do get that backlash. And just kudos to him in the way that he keeps going. It just really inspires me, and so many of the other young people that I work with. Many of you know who you are. Your stories and your bravery has always really inspired me, and that's why I love doing what I do, really, essentially. So what helps me? Well, as I said, I'm a Christian, so a lot of what helps me is to do with my faith. But I think there's some really general principles that whether you're someone who believes in God or has a faith, or someone who doesn't, that actually they work in kind of similar ways. So for me, it's like, what helps me to remember that I am loved and that I'm valued without needing to prove that worth. So it's not feeling loved and valued when I do really well in my job, or in my grades, or in a particular thing that I've done or achieved, but it's just knowing that I'm loved and I'm valued just for being me. What do we do, and how do we find those places that refill us with that truth? The next one will be like, how do I find my peace? So again, for me, that's really faith related, in finding that peace and that worth in how God sees me, but actually it's really important for us to understand where do we find our peace and what might be our peace stealers. So what might keep me up at night, what might make me anxious, what might leave me restless, what are my triggers, and these will hugely vary between people. For some people it is something very specific that has happened. For some people it's you know, if change happens, or if a relationship breaks down, or it's something very significant that can happen many times and can be a recurring thing that really triggers those things. And for some people it is, you know, who knows what comes along, but some things we get through and some things just break us. And I think understanding ourselves and having that self-awareness is so important. Understanding what those peace stealers are, but also, you know, what gives us peace as well, and how do we learn more about that, how do we do more about that for ourselves. And that might be getting professional help, that might be finding spaces to be able to talk, that might be unpacking some of those things and those thought processes, or it might just be like, this is what I need to do, and if I go and do this, it just gives me peace. And I think that understanding of ourselves can be really powerful. Also, where do I find my safe space? It's really important to have people and spaces and places where you feel you can just be you can be vulnerable, you can give the honest answer to how are you, or are you okay? I think that's really powerful and really important in that everyday well-being, not just the day where you feel like you're breaking down, but the day where things haven't gone so well and actually you could really do with someone to talk that through with. And for me as a youth worker, like, all of these things are really important in what I do. So providing that safe space for young people to be honest and share how they're really feeling, and be known that they are loved and they are valued just as they are. And that hopefully we can provide some places that give people peace, or that help people to unpack some of those peace stealers as well. And then 2 final things would be, don't be afraid or ashamed to get any professional help, or to reach out when you're struggling, whether that's to the people around you, or to helplines, or to support, or to your GP. Like, there's nothing wrong in that. You don't need to struggle on your own in a way that you wouldn't do that with a physical illness. You don't have to do that with a mental illness either. And just find those people who you know will support you, and maybe even take someone along with you, or get somebody to support you in whatever way you're reaching out. And then also finally, I think for those of us that might be in a good place right now, or at the points of our lives where we might be in a good place, it's really thinking about how do we live our lives in a way that promotes the well-being of our fellow human beings. How do we promote the flourishing of our fellow human beings in our words and our actions personally? And then also, how do we take responsibility in bringing challenge to those wider issues and systems and symptoms and things that actually might be really inhibiting the well-being of others? So how do we take personal responsibility in promoting good well-being in others? And also, how can we have a wider impact of helping others to feel heard, to feel safe, and to feel loved?
Thank you, Lou, for sharing your story. It's been really helpful to have a different perspective on this channel, and not just my own voice that you're listening to. If anyone has any questions about mental health or how we can support each other, please comment them in the comment box below. And please like and subscribe to the channel to get more videos about mental health, about transition, and about LGBTQ+ and faith. So yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Goodbye.